What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am incredibly excited to welcome our guest today, Sudha Foote. Sudha is most recently the former Vice President of Strategy and Business Operations at Dropbox. Prior to Dropbox, Sudha led growth strategy at Amazon, Lending Club, and then led business operations at Silicon Valley Bank from 2012 to 2018. After receiving her bachelor's in mathematics and statistics from University of Connecticut and her master's in management science from Stanford University, she started her professional career working in management consulting and then went on to be a marketing analytics leader at Citibank. Sudha, it is so great to have you on the show. Welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Carly.
Of course. So, Sudha, set the scene for us. Where are you in the world? What is life like right now? What are you up to?
Right now, I'm between gigs, really enjoying life and digging into some of my passions outside of work while I think about what's next.
Amazing. So, as you know, I do love to start off the show with saying, take me back to when you were a little girl. What was life like? Where did you grow up, and what did you want to be when you were thinking of what your dream was?
Absolutely. I was born in India. I started school when I was 3 years old, and I learned to read when I was 3. And I will say it was probably the biggest milestone in my life. It's kind of funny to say learning to read is a milestone because we all get there at one point or another. But it was really the beginning of my journey toward self-directed learning. And to this day, it's one of the most important kind of, I think, differentiating things that I bring to the table as a professional in business. I was a bit shy, I was nerdy, and books were kind of an escape for me. I moved to the US when I was 6. And when I started school here in the US, I was multiple years ahead, but I was really kind of short and small. And my parents wanted me to be in the age appropriate grade. Mm-hmm. What that created was a situation where I was years ahead in school. And so school was kind of this like more social, environment. And when I started out of school, I felt really, really different. And the story that really comes to mind is my first day at American elementary school. I was in first grade and going to the lunchroom and not having an understanding of like how a lunchroom worked, because apparently they work differently in India. I'm just being mortified about like picking up my food and like the utensils and, was I going to be capable of, actually eating my food in an American appropriate way? And also I was the only brown kid in my entire area. I grew up mostly in the Northeast in New England. And so no one looked like me. And on day one at the school, every single person knew who I was. And so being the shy, nerdy person who was like a little bit awkward with like American customs and, how to go about the world, it was terrifying. And I think that kind of set the stage, I think, for like having a few butterflies in my stomach, and kind of like being a little bit of an outsider looking in. And I think that's a theme that'll kind of come out as we have our conversation today, because I think like being able to abstract from what's going on in the business world and kind of having this kind of slightly more objective perspective has been super helpful to me. But getting back to school, so because school was so easy for the first few years, I had a lot of time to like lean into things that were interesting to me and really kind of learn about all kinds of things. And so one of the first things I did is I read the World Book Encyclopedia. So back in the day, when I was growing up, everyone had an encyclopedia and our family bought one, had it in a prominent location. And as a 6, 7-year-old, I just was very curious about things. And so I actually read it from A to Z. And I just thought it was like such a fun thing to do, right? I also read loads of fiction and nonfiction. I tended to read a lot of books about the natural world in the nonfiction space, biographies, just anything I could get my hands on, I just consumed. And so it was interesting because once I got through this period of kind of like having people catch up to what I had learned in India, I ended up, my school for a couple of years did something called IPI, individually prescribed instruction, which I guess was a prevalent kind of school of thought at that time. And so the whole point of IPI was to meet the individual needs of children. And so the curriculum, like you would take a little pretest, and then there would be like basically workbooks and like self-directed learning for a period of time. So I got pretty kind of hip to the jive that I could basically complete, a period of school units type work in a week. So, let's say it was divided into like 8-week segments or whatever. I realized pretty early on, like week 1, I could complete all my work for that period of time. And then I could spend the rest of my time basically in the library holed up with books. And so in the beginning, I did all my work in the first week, and then I would spend the next 7 weeks kind of goofing off in the library, reading everything I could possibly get my hands on. But then I got kind of lazy and kind of full of myself. And so then I decided, instead of doing all the work up front, let me just do all the reading. And in the last week, I'll just do all the work. And I misjudged one semester how much time it was going to take. And I didn't complete all the work. So much to my horror, I ended up getting like an A- or something that period, which was like a good lesson to myself. It's like, I should probably do the work first and then like kind of lean into the things I enjoyed. So that's kind of how my education started out. It was very weird and it was very individual. And I think in a lot of ways that was an enormous benefit because internal motivation became incredibly important to me in my life and turns out in my career as well.
Yeah.
So in terms of what I wanted to be when I grew up, like I just loved every subject. I just loved learning. And so I just found myself just curious about a lot of things. I didn't know kind of what I was going to do when I grew up at all. But the seeds of kind of what I was going to do were planted when my father was a huge viewer of PBS and specifically a program called Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser, which went on, I think, for about 30 years from like the 70s to the early 2000s. Louis had this program on PBS, which was basically about public markets and companies and how they succeed and fail. And my whole motivation was just to spend time with my dad. I just wanted to curl up next to my dad and spend quality time with him. We were really, really close. And so I would kind of sit and daydream while my dad watched this show week after week. And it was just kind of our time. And then over time, like my daydreaming was interrupted by like getting my interest piqued by something someone would say on this program, right? A CEO of a company, or they talk about the fluctuations in the stock market. And then I just like very slowly started getting curious and I started watching like a little bit more of the show and a little bit more of the show. And I realized over time, wow, this is kind of interesting. Like, figuring out like why some companies succeed and why they fail and what are the like conditions for success and failure became something that I became like a little bit intrigued of, but I thought it was like a quirky little thing that I did with my dad to talk about, these topics. But that was kind of, I think, the beginning of, business and Wall Street and, public companies and how do they become public companies and all those sorts of things. So
I love it. I think that is, first of all, I think I learned just so much about you just from that, little bit of your childhood. I think you were so nerdy in the best way possible and almost maybe even, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you were also confident as a young girl because, even kind of pushing the studies to the end of the quarter rather than the beginning, you were like, you know what, why do it in the beginning? I'm capable of doing it at the end. And I'm curious, Sudha, you mentioned how moving to America, you're the only brown girl in your school, so you stood out. Is that something that you went home to your parents and you asked them about, saying like, we're different? How do I go about it? Was that a conversation you ever had, or was it just you navigating it yourself?
Well, that's such an interesting question. Like in today's day and age, like I think we would all talk about it. And
yeah,
but back then it was just, my parents were immigrants. They were making their way in this country after being very successful in India. And they were both like working parents. and super busy with their careers and leaned into it. And actually, my brother and I were latchkey kids, which is a term I don't even know if it's relevant today. But basically, what that means is, at a very early age, I was given a key, and after school, we were dropped off by the school bus, and my brother and I would go home. We drop all our school things, head out the door, and play with all our neighbors and our friends. And then, when my parents showed up, we'd come back home and have dinner and do our homework. And so, and my family, I think, and especially my parents, were pretty like old school in their thinking. Like, no one talked about feelings, or like that wasn't a topic of conversation. So. Right. I mean, I never talked to my parents about feelings. I never talked to them about being different, but I know my parents were facing exactly the same things at work, because they were also kind of one of a kind. And this isn't a story I've shared, I don't think, with anyone, but like, we lived in multiple towns where we were the only brown people. And I remember we moved to a town in Connecticut that had 30,000 people. And there was a lot of hubbub when we moved to town, because I think we were actually the first non-white people to ever live in this very old historical town in Connecticut. And we started getting phone messages, basically, like, of the type you think about that might have existed, like, right. decades prior, like, you don't belong here, people left little notes in our mailbox, etc. So it was something that was like always at the edges, but my family is very resilient and very like, we're going to make our way in the world. Yeah. My father, for example, spent a year in Russia when he was, a young man, learning Russian and learning engineering there. And so like, I think that was just kind of part of our family ethos, was just to kind of stiff upper lip, persevere, and be better, like just be more competent, be more kind, be more like, capable. And so that was definitely a very underlying theme for me, even though we weren't able to talk about it. It was definitely these are the hurdles we're facing. And of course, we're just going to, up our competency game as a kind of counterpoint to kind of what's going on in the larger world.
No, that's incredible. And I think you're right. It seems like it was almost this underlying DNA that just got passed down. And, the next challenge came up and you guys all had it in you to say, you know what, this is the next thing we're going to face, and we will face it. But that's amazing. And so you grew up around Connecticut, from my understanding, and then you decided to go to University of Connecticut for your undergrad degree. And you decided to go and pursue a mathematics and statistics degree. So at some point, that passion for books and words and literature perhaps changed to now numbers. And I'm curious that at this stage in college, is that something you saw yourself in the future? Like, I am going to be a mathematician. How were you thinking of career post-college then?
I wish I had like a thoughtful plan, but honestly, I went to college having no idea what I was going to pursue. And again, because I have interest in a lot of things, I pursued kind of a very broad liberal arts education. And it came time for sophomore year, and I had to declare a major. And I was a little bit panicked, and I didn't know what to declare, because I loved my classics classes as much as I liked taking organic chemistry and various math classes. And so I took the path of least resistance, also known as the laziest path, which is math came very easily to me. And I felt like I could do it very quickly, which would free up a lot, again, this thematic of, let me get through the work quickly, so it could free up time for more self-directed learning, so that I could, read whatever I wanted, do some hobbies, etc. And so junior year, I took a class in a subject called operations research. And I had this light bulb moment of, wow, this is mathematics applied to business. And that was kind of the full circle moment of, ooh, if I pursued this, and of course, I'm not going to know enough about it, I'm going to have to go to grad school. But if I pursued this, I could actually have a career in business where I could help solve challenging business problems. And so that's what led me to kind of grad school and pursuing a degree, which at the time was called operations research, but then became known as management science. The university kind of reissued my degree and rebranded it. And my good fortune was, when I was an undergraduate, I was able to take graduate level courses in math. So when I got to grad school, I had a little bit more free reign to take all kinds of classes, which I did. across a variety of disciplines in mathematics and statistics. I took a couple classes in the business school, took a computer science class. So I was able to kind of dabble a bit and have a little bit more flexibility in what I pursued. So that was really interesting.
So from there, you spent a good amount of time also in consulting and deciding to go consult. So at that point, was it more, okay, were you optimizing for this is a secure job? This is a common pathway that people go to. I don't know if it was also back then as common as it still is today, honestly. But was that kind of your thinking towards it? Or were you, did something else excite you? And then you were like, no, let me put that on hold for now.
Well, my main focus and why I pursued consulting was I really wanted to be good at my craft, Carly. Like I was so focused on being extraordinarily good at it. And I felt like I was good at school, but did that translate to actually being able to solve business problems? I had no idea. And so
Okay.
that's really what I set out to do. Consulting, I think, has become like a really enticing career path today for a lot of individuals coming out of, especially the most prestigious colleges. But at the time, I think it was more the person's path who didn't know what they wanted to do, if that makes sense, right? It's like, oh, I'm not sure what I want to do. Let me dabble in
Yeah.
some consulting, see if there are certain like business verticals that stick out as being particularly interesting. Maybe I'm going to learn about like different kinds of careers and jobs, which I think was much more kind of hidden back in the day. I think we
Right.
have just so much more access to information and knowledge and understanding different career paths and so on and so forth. So just doing consulting was a great way to just kind of again focus on the thing that I did have control over, which is getting really good at doing the thing that I was trained to do, and that I wanted to do like extraordinarily well.
And how did it translate into a professional setting? You had the experience from an academic setting, right? You looked different. You were, kind of excluded in that regard. And then maybe also from an intelligence perspective, school came easy to you, it seemed like, in all regards, especially math, and whatnot. And now entering the workforce, did you still sense that separation? Did you still sense that, did you ever have to prove yourself outwardly to others? And try and make yourself a presence in the workforce?
My first job, which was at a consulting firm, I was basically given this hard problem to solve that was a mathematical problem. I had to write code, and it was part of a larger consulting project for a Fortune 50 company. And so it was a real, I will tell you, it was an interesting experience because A, the problem was hard. And B, I wasn't used to working on one thing for like 10 hours a day, every day. So like just sitting at a desk and having to focus on one thing every single day for multiple weeks. This is going to sound silly, but I found it almost crushing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm used to, taking 5 or 6 classes and dabbling in this and
Right.
that and solving all kinds of problems. And so that transition to work actually was really, really hard. But then, I kind of got the flow. And then I started working, I was working on this problem. And it's really fun for me. And I think for a lot of us to get into that flow state of really, spending a lot of time on something, working incredibly hard on it, and then kind of slowly figuring it out, right? Breaking a big problem into smaller problems and then just solving
Yeah.
those smaller problems, like writing the code, seeing if it's working, making incremental improvements, and kind of getting to the end game and showing that to, your manager, your leader along the way. So it was a great experience, actually. And so that was like my first project, right? They throw me to the wolves. They give me this kind of undefined problem with like just a hard mathematical component. And, I will tell you, had huge butterflies, being assigned this problem because I'm like, oh, dear God, like people are going to rely on me, like working on this. I'm assuming there's a backstop. There are many more senior people here. But that kind of led to problem after problem. And I went from being like the technical lead to a consulting project lead, and so on in my early consulting career. So it was great. And the funny thing is, every single project that I was assigned, I had butterflies. And even to this day, I've done lots of projects across lots of industries. I still get butterflies. And I feel like butterflies are the thing that tell me that I'm doing something that's impactful, important, hard, I don't know what the answer is. No one knows what the answer is. And so, like, all those butterflies in the early days kind of trained me to say, oh, this is part of the process. This is part of knowing that I'm doing something worthwhile. And that's really what I wanted to do.
And we talked about this before, and one thing really stuck out. You mentioned to me that point blank, you were a robot starting off in your career. And I want to dive into that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a robot? And do you think there's some value in being a robot? Do you think we should combat that and stray away from having that? Because I honestly, when I heard that, I could actually understand that in many early professionals across different industries. So I'd love to kind of hear that experience for you.
Yeah, I think as a young person in business, and especially young woman, and I am fairly slight, and I'm usually in a room and have been throughout my career with people who are taller and male, and so I think I came into these situations wanting to be taken very seriously.
Right.
Frankly, I didn't want to be perceived as a flighty person, etc. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's perfectly fine, but I didn't really feel like I could bring my full self to work. And so I felt a need to be serious and accomplish things like with a high degree of quality and speed, and have like really high value output. So the positives of being kind of robotic and not bringing your whole self to work are, you can be very productive when you're not, necessarily, building relationships with people, going out to lunches and coffee, et cetera, and having lots of social conversations. There was massive learning, frankly, because I felt like because I was setting my bar unreasonably high, I had to really dive into things. Like it wasn't just about that problem. It was about understanding that whole class of problems. It was about understanding the business area that I was working in. It was reading and absorbing lots of facts and information and bringing all that together, which was super important. It also forced me to be incredibly collaborative because I knew, like, usually when you're a consultant, you're not a subject matter expert in that business
Mhm.
area, that set of problems, right? Because you're going from one industry to another, you're going from one type of business problem to another. And
Right.
so, very early on, it was very humbling to say, I'm not a subject matter expert. And so I have to be a really active listener. I have to be highly collaborative. I have to make sure that my communication skills are, very much on point. And that it's my job to kind of connect the dots, right? Like gather the information, gather the business acumen, and put a structure to it, and help a company get from point A to point B, which is having a vision, having a strategy, having a clear execution plan, and a roadmap for executing against that. So
Where did you learn that from though? Like even the communication skills, like all these different things. Was it observing leadership and seeing kind of how they are leading a team? Was it like making an effort saying, can I meet with you for coffee and talk about, can you give me some lessons? Or was it more just, yeah, on your own, a natural thing that came to you?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with observing
Okay.
passively, because I was shy and nerdy. Like actually having a coffee with someone and asking them these questions, like I didn't even think of that. And this is the
Right.
internet, so you couldn't actually Google something and say, like, how do you do this better, right? And so I think a lot of it was observation, and part of it was, my style was quite different, Carly. Like I didn't like to talk very, I didn't want to be the person talking a lot. I wanted to be the person listening a lot. And I wanted to be the person asking like the appropriate questions very simply and clearly. So very early on, I didn't like jargon, like business jargon. And so even to this day, like when I'm doing any kind of project with anyone, regardless of, who they are, what level they are in, etc., I will use the simplest basic, clear language to understand kind of what are their concerns, what are their motivations, what do they see going on, access all the information and knowledge they have. And so I think that kind of approach is just was my approach to kind of sitting back a little bit and being in the shadows. And over time, what I realized is if I did a project well, no one knew that I was involved in it, if that makes sense. And to me, that was that was part of my criteria for success. Like they felt like they were directing the project, that they did the work and they owned the results. And so being a little bit more kind of low key and highly collaborative actually created these incredibly interesting conditions to do these pieces of work that I'm to this day incredibly proud of, that other people took credit for. And I felt like this is perfect, right? Because if other people own it, then they're going to have a vested interest in turning it into reality. And I always was much more focused on impact than myself or my career or anything remotely like that. I didn't really think about myself as like, worrying about what was next. I was always thinking about impact and influence and progress.
That is so fascinating. And I'm actually incredibly happy you mentioned that. And from that, I'm so curious, you became head of growth strategy at Amazon, VP of strategy and biz ops at Dropbox, these top companies. Obviously, going now to a leadership role, I feel like it's a bit more challenging to be, in the shadows or to be the one always listening. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I haven't been there. But did you have to learn things, kind of transferring to managerial positions where maybe they were unnatural for you, but you needed to do it?
This is probably an area that is still a work in progress, Carly. So it's a very on point question. Because of this outsider in perspective and because of my like deep passion for impact, I tend to be pretty work focused and pretty results focused. And I think as I'm reaching these, higher levels of leadership in my career, the things I really enjoy are managing incredibly effective teams and partnering massively cross functionally. And what I'm realizing is more and more of my job is actually like having social connections with the people I work with. That is incredibly valued, and I'm making a pivot. I'll be honest, from being a little less work focused, which is really hard for me. I'll be honest. I love like teaching and working with my team, and I love working on extremely complex problems that no one else can solve, that are hard and time sensitive. And so I think the skills to being a leader, a senior leader, especially in a larger organization, are really different than being a manager or even like a mid-level leader in an organization, right? And I think that's where like
Yeah.
I've had to become more vulnerable, come out of my comfort zone of being this kind of shy and reserved person to being a little bit more kind of self-effacing, self-deprecating, saying, hey, I'm this awkward mathematician. Like, I don't have these social skills, frankly. And I've always felt a little bit outsider looking in on, everything that's going on. And so, as I am, in the later, in this stage of my career, this has been something that I'm, actively working on and trying to get better and better at. But I think, at the end of the day, I think I thrive in meritocracies. I'll be honest with you, where the work really matters. I think that's where I can shine the most. Um, and
Yeah.
um, and I think like coming together with a collection of people where the work really matters is important to me, if that makes sense. Because that is at the end of the day where I get the most satisfaction. And I'm one of these people who like I build relationship through experiences as opposed to like having a conversation about what you did over the weekend. Like that's fun for me too. But if I'm like locking arms with you, Carly, and we're working on a project together, and through that project, we're getting to know each other, how we work, we're sharing tidbits of our life experiences, what we watched on TV the night before. Like to me, that feels more organic and consistent with like how I operate. And I think that's part of the shyness and the reservedness. Like, if I'm talking about things that I'm super passionate about, then it's easier for me to kind of lean into some of those softer sides of getting to know people, if that makes sense.
Also, speaking of this outsider insider and being a woman and, being a woman in the workforce, we've talked a lot about how throughout your career, you were often the only woman in the room. And that comes with a bunch of different things on the periphery. But one thing I want to mention is obviously you've experienced also the pay gap. and what it means to negotiate your salary. And I don't think you've actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but have you ever negotiated your salary, or parts where you wish you did early on in your career where it's challenging as a woman? Yeah, I would love to talk through that.
Yeah. So I think that the short answer is early in my career, I didn't do it at all, or did it incredibly poorly. And I think I've only made incremental progress since then. So the best example is my very first job out of grad school. I started on the same day that one of my peers in grad school, he and I both went to Stanford, same department. We started on the very same day at at the same consulting firm. Um, and, we went about doing our work. 12 months later, one of my women managers who was overseeing my work basically said to me, Sudha, did you know this person is making 10% more money than you? Their starting salary was 10% higher than yours. And I was just kind of taken aback, my naivete. I'm like, oh, he must have done a better job negotiating his salary. I just assumed that every new associate was getting paid the same amount of money. I didn't really understand that there was room for negotiation.
Yeah.
And she said, Sudha, you basically put yourself in a hole for a very long time, because all of our, raises and everything is based on your initial starting salary. And so this is going to have a compounding effect. And it was kind of like her way of saying, hey, you need to do a better job. Look out for yourself, get smarter at this. And I will tell you, honestly and transparently, I haven't gotten better at it. I find it so difficult as a woman, and as me, to say, this is what I deserve, this is my market value. I'm just I get very excited about the work I'm doing, and I take the negotiation part very not seriously. And it's been a, consistent problem throughout my career. I'm probably getting a tiny bit better at it, but it's very incremental. But I will say the real action that it has spurred is me looking at my teams that I manage and making sure that women don't have to negotiate their salaries, that they don't have to advocate for promotions or high quality work. And an example of that is when I joined a company, I took on a team of, X numbers of people. And I noticed that there were several women on my team that were making significantly less than the men on my team, even though they had Stanford MBAs, advanced degrees, when some men on my team didn't. They had more years of experience, and I couldn't figure it out. And so 2 weeks into the job, I went to HR and I said, hey, what's going on here? There are people who have better credentials, who happen to be women, who are making lower salaries, significantly lower salaries than men who have great credentials, but it's not up to par. Objectively, look at their resumes. And so we had a conversation, and I basically adjusted two women's salaries very substantially, in my first month of work. And I felt I needed to do that because I couldn't look myself in the mirror and say, oh, here are these super competent people making less money. And they didn't even know, frankly. It wasn't something that was known to any of the parties. But I will tell you, those women thanked me so profusely and said, I can't imagine this happening at most companies or under most leaders. And so to me, it was a small step in just paying it forward and saying, when I hire women, I'm going to look at what, their market value is, what other people at the company are paid, whether other people on my team are being paid, and make sure that they're getting paid commensurate with what their, value added is. And so, that was just me saying, I don't want this shortcoming of mine to continue to show up in the world, and I want to do something about it.
Yeah. And look, it's amazing. It's sad, but it's amazing to hear these stories of where you've seen it firsthand. Either you've experienced it or, teams that you've led. And in a way, I can understand your process early on in your career, because it seems like it was so natural for you to prove yourself with the work, just silently executing and doing the work so well. And then maybe, counterfactually saying, okay, look, I deserve this raise. Whereas, right when you get the job, it's difficult because, you just want to dive into the work and show your impact and show your performance. So I can understand that. And kind of throughout your career, from your perspective, do you have almost advice for young women who are starting their careers to say, look, even before I prove myself, I should be standing up and advocating for myself?
I'm probably the worst person to ask this question, but I deeply believe that that is the right answer. And I think this is
Yeah.
where I think having a network of women who are both
Yeah.
peers and more senior to you as a woman in a variety of fields becomes incredibly important. And I will tell you, over time, I did and do have those kinds of relationships that are incredibly valuable in this regard. I tend to do slightly different work than a lot of other people, which is always kind of my conundrum, because like there aren't that many strategy people, there aren't that many strategy leaders, right? Like if you're a marketing professional or you do sales, or you're a computer scientist, it's clear what your value is to a firm, and it's clear to assess your market value. There are more peers, et cetera. So I find myself kind of in a narrow career path in a sense. But I think it's incredibly helpful, especially like along this dimension, to get better at negotiating, period. Because I think work is a series of negotiations, not just about your salary, but in so many different ways, like what resources are going to be put on your team, on your projects, et cetera, and so on and so forth. So having these critical skills, I think, is essential. And they're teaching it in business school. And I think it's, some of the most valuable pieces of instruction that we can get as women in business.
So, Sudha, tell me now, you went down a whole, like you said, a path in strategy. And nowadays in tech, you have product management, business development, business operations, strategy, so many different sectors. What is strategy? And if you can distill it down for us, and even more so, at what point in a company's almost lifespan do they need to say, we need a strategist to come in and help us out?
Yeah, so great question. And a question we could probably spend at least an hour talking about, Carly, to be honest. So I'm going to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about kind of from a bookish perspective, what is strategy? But I will start by saying I think strategy and being a strategic thinker is important to every role in business and probably in our personal lives as well. Because to me, and I've taught classes in strategic thinking in a corporate environment, like to, leaders and high performers and so on. And so one of the first things I say is everyone can be great at strategy. It's not a specific skill set or, something that you have to spend years honing. But from a textbook perspective, I really like Michael Porter's description of what is strategy in his seminal article, What is Strategy? And it's really three things. It's creating a unique and valuable position. It's making trade-offs between what you do and what you don't do. And the don't do is incredibly important, because in most parts of business, most businesses try to do too much, and they try to satisfy a broad swath of customers instead of focusing on those strategic customers and the ones that are going to create the most, that they can create the most value for over time. And then the third component of three is, really creating fit among a company's activities. So we shouldn't do just a random collection of activities, right? We should do things that together create additional value. And thinking about how to do that is incredibly important. So I think, to your question of when is it important, I think every leader in every business and every employee actually needs to be very strategic in how they think about like what they're going to do every single day and how they're going to go about doing it. Because these are the skills that really determine, like, is what I do going to make impact? So specific story, I was head of product management at one point, and I had a team of many people, and one of the people on the team was a woman, very, very good product manager, but she had a long rap sheet of she wasn't strategic. And so when she started reporting to me, she said, Sudha, the number one thing I want to learn is how to be strategic, because everyone keeps saying I'm not strategic. And I'm kind of stuck in my career. And so what I ended up doing with her is it was a see one, do one, teach one situation where she worked on a strategy project with me, where I did the work, she watched me do it. Then I assigned her a strategy project, and I was more like a member of the team. And I helped her, when issues came up, or I would execute things she wanted me to execute. And then she, interestingly, she became extraordinarily good at it. And she went on to get like promotions every year for the next several years, like at a level that was actually, she was already pretty senior. And so it super accelerated her career. But to me, that is like the perfect example of just being really smart about what we do and how, we go about being more systematic in our thinking about what we do can be incredibly important. So she wasn't necessarily doing anything differently. It was how she was framing problems, what she was focused on, how she was communicating about what she was doing, like made an enormous impact. And I mean, we're good friends to this day. She'll text me all the time and, catch me up on her career, et cetera. And it makes me so happy. And this is kind of repeated over and over again. It's one of the things I enjoy doing most in my roles, are helping people I work with learn these, very simple and basic skills that we can all learn to be more effective.
Yeah. I love that. And I think even, with my day-to-day job, talking to a lot of founders, early stage founders, I could see that, right? Where there's no, sometimes you get excited and you think of, all the different things you could do rather than focus in on, these are our customers that we need to focus. And beyond that, I could totally see the application from even a personal perspective. So I think you kind of can help me lead my strategy from my personal life, but that's another topic. Okay, Sudha, beyond this, you've also experienced just leadership as a whole at these top companies. What do you think is missing right now in leadership? What do we get wrong that maybe we've lost over the years, or just in general that we kind of need to alter in a way?
I'll just throw this out there, but I'm an Enneagram 7 for those people who are interested in, psychological analysis in the workplace. And what that is basically, I think, optimistic visionary.
Okay.
So I think my answer to this question is it's not so much what is missing as missed opportunity, frankly. So I feel like there are so many important problems that can be solved, business problems, but not many of them are being tackled. And I think it has to do with the people who are tackling them, frankly, right? Having a diversity of lived experiences, I think, would allow us to tackle a broader range of human problems and business problems.
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of the missing gap, because as I live my life every day, I'm like, I run into roadblocks and things that I'm like, oh, I wish someone would fix this, right? But they're not necessarily the problems that are being sorted out and solved, right? I feel like as a industry, we focus on a narrow set of problems for a fairly narrow set of people. So I would love to see a broader set of problems for a broader set of people addressed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I think you're so spot on, is that people, if we distill it down to first, and this actually, it's very similar to what you mentioned, even from the very beginning, is you're driven by impact. You want to make an impact. And where does that come from? That rooted in, there's a problem that we need to solve. So I love that. Okay, Sudha, I would love to know, what is your most contrarian opinion that you have?
That is a great question. I think probably my most contrarian viewpoint that I have really strong conviction around is math is easy. And I think it's easy and it's important. And I think our educational systems have failed us in convincing people that, you have to have a special magical skill set to be good at it. And not many people can be good at it. So it actually pains me to say that, because I feel like over time, and when I look at the data, fewer and fewer people are pursuing mathematics and STEM type degrees in the time since I got my degrees. And so I would love to see that turned around.
Wow. I really love that. And we can actually have a whole conversation just about that. Because I think, yes, in our education system, even there's still this like totem pole of subjects, and especially like math and science are, STEM and hard. And then people get so discouraged from such an early age to say, like, you're not good at math. And then from then on, the confidence really affects them from, getting older and whatnot. So I think you're so spot on with that. And I love that you've experienced and you have this outlook like, look, math is easy if you distill it down to its problems rather than the symptoms of it all. So I think that's excellent. And okay, beyond that, as you're kind of maybe thinking of your next move and whatnot, what craft are you spending your lifetime honing or trying to get better at?
Very interesting question, Carly. And as I think about it, I think being good in relationship is what's most important to me. Being a good friend, being a good partner to my husband, being a good parent,
Yeah.
and building that social connections, like really is top of mind for me, and is extraordinarily important. And I want to do it in a very kind of intentional way, whether they are like one-off events where I'm just like reaching out to people. I did a service learning event last week, and I ended up chatting with a young woman who was fascinating. And we just struck up at this beautiful conversation over the 3 hours of service learning. And it made the whole experience so meaningful. And I'm doing that kind of very intentionally everywhere I go, whether they're deep relationships or temporary relationships or, transactional relationships. I'm just trying to be more present and available and get to know people on a deeper level. So that's really the thing I'm working on right now.
And I think I love it. And I think people forget that it actually is in a very intentional aspect of life. And it's, nowadays we have all these distractions, phones and everything, that it's actually pretty, it becomes a challenge to say, no, I'm being present with you right now, which I think it's great. Okay. One of my favorite questions, and I could, probably list off a few after this chat, but Sudha, what do you say? What is your superpower?
I think curiosity, Carly. Just being a very curious person has led to some really interesting personal life experiences and professional life experiences. So I think that really is my superpower, which is to easily curious and just going out and gathering enormous amounts of information, facts, and data, and understanding something like deeply is something that I very much enjoy.
I think that very much aligns with your after-school hobby of reading the encyclopedia after school, just as a casual read. So I love it. It is such an honor and I'm such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for coming. I absolutely loved it. I learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.